evening, team. Dr. Nitin is stuck in traffic, so should be with us in about 10 minutes time. So I thought I'll just update you on our future programs. Today, of course, you know that there is a talk on newer developments in cataract surgery and LASIK. Next week, we are bringing in Dr. Chitwan Dubey of LH Hiranandani Hospital, Powai. Newer developments in antenatal care of bad obstetric history. The investigations which are done in pregnant women to pick up the neonatal complications early or to monitor a precious pregnancy have gone way beyond just 3D or 4D ultrasonography. There are a lot of blood tests and a lot of imaging modalities, dual test, triple test, and whatnot. And then even assisted reproduction has gone ahead in leaps and bounds. So as a family physician, we have to be aware of all of this because the patient will ultimately come and ask us. 13th of April, we are calling in 2 dentists, one adult dentist, MDS, and secondly, a pediatric dentist, because you will not believe, I was shocked when I saw the dental treatment bill of a 3-year-old child at 3,40,000 rupees. All the teeth were caries. Like somebody will ask me, no, doctor, should I do root canal for 3-year-old child? I would say, oh, he's too young. But then again, this science also has gone up very high. So 7th of April will be the dentist. And then after that, I will be starting my own talks. First of the talk will be how to manage temporomandibular pain or arthritis and pain in the wrist. So we need our team members, all of you, to keep giving us inputs on what topic should be covered in training. And all these 6 of the updates are going to be on YouTube. We'll be giving a link once they're uploaded, so you can start looking at them. Repeat if you want to see them. Okay, Dr. Nitin is here. Welcome, Dr. Nitin. I was killing some time till you came in. Welcome. Please share the screen.
Thank you. Good evening, Dr. Asrani. Good evening, friends.
Nitin, little louder.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
You need to be little louder.
1 second.
Okay, am I audible now?
Yeah, now you're audible.
Yeah. Okay. So like I said, I'm sorry I was held up in a little bit in the clinic and then in the traffic. So right at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Asrani and IDG for having me here. And the topic given to me today was the recent advances in cataract and refractive surgery. So let me start with sharing the screen. So are my slides visible?
Yeah, they are visible.
Okay. So not wanting to delay further, I think I'll start off right with the. So I have decided to divide this topic into 2 parts. The first part being newer developments in cataract surgery, and the second part being the newer developments in refractive and LASIK surgery. What I would prefer to do is that we'll break after the first topic so that we can take questions regarding cataract surgery, and then go to refractive surgery and then be able to solve all the queries in that. Is that okay, Dr. Asrani? Doing it that way?
Yeah, that is okay.
Okay. Okay, so like we all know that every healthy eye has got a clear lens. When this clear lens, which is the nature given lens, the crystalline lens, gets clouded due to age, it's called as a cataract. Now, all said and done, we don't need to repeat the fact that the treatment of cataract is only by surgery. All the older techniques of drops and things of that sort have now got no relevance. So we know that the treatment of cataract is only by a cataract surgery, and in the modern day cataract surgery, it is always followed by an implantation of an intraocular lens or an IOL implant. So over the period of time, over the so many years which cataract surgery has been going on, we have a lot of evolution. In fact, the evolution of cataract surgery is probably the most, it has seen a sea change as compared to any other surgery, or maybe especially in ophthalmology and practically, I think, in any other field of medicine. The amount of changes which have occurred in cataract surgery, I don't think any other field has seen so many changes over a period of time. So we initially had the intracapsular cataract surgery, where the whole nucleus along with its surrounding capsular bag was removed. The patient was then left aphakic in those days because there was no support for placing an intraocular lens, and had to wear these thick aphakic glasses which were looking like soda water bottle like glasses, which had their own complications. After this, in the intracapsular surgery came in an era where an anterior chamber lens was kept on top of the iris because there was no capsular bag support to support a posterior chamber lens. Then we had a total sea change in the principle of cataract surgery, and with the evolution of a technique called as an extracapsular cataract surgery, where what was done is an opening was made in the anterior capsule. Having done that, the nucleus from within the eye was removed in toto through a large incision. The incision used to be nothing less than 10 to 12 millimeters. And this was followed by placing a lens with the capsular support. So the capsule which was left behind, the posterior capsule and the part of the anterior capsule, was used to support the intraocular lens. And then the wound was sutured by multiple sutures. Obviously, this had its own period of time when it was done. There were many side effects because of high astigmatism caused due to the stitches, and the rehab time was much longer because there was a large wound which was involved. After this came in almost about maybe about 20-25 years ago, came in a technique called as a SICS, which is also called as small incision cataract surgery, which later on it was renamed as MSICS, that is manual small incision cataract surgery, because phacoemulsification, which came in later, was also a smaller incision, so so that there was no confusion. So what was done here in the small incision cataract surgery is the wound was made not at the corneoscleral junction, not at the limbus, but it was a scleral wound, and in the sclera a tunnel was made, and through this tunnel the nucleus was removed from within the eye, the cortical matter was aspirated out, and then the implant was placed into the capsular bag. Now, because it was a tunnel incision, it was a self-sealing incision, because of which no stitches were required. So this was definitely a refinement. The wound being more on the scleral side, the amount of astigmatism was much lower. Since there were no stitches, the rehab time was less. So this was a definite improvement over the extracapsular cataract surgery. And after this came in the technique which has stood the test of time, though this has evolved in the sort of the finer nuances of the technique and the different machines and the different instruments used. Phacoemulsification has really stood the test of time, and this is a technique which we still follow today. What is done here is a very small incision, as small as about 2.2 to 2.8 millimeters, is made in the clear cornea. This again is a tunnel incision, so it's a self-sealing incision. Having done that, the anterior capsule is opened in a very, very precise circular fashion. And then the nucleus of the cataract, of the lens, the crystalline lens, is removed out after cracking it into multiple pieces and then aspirated with the phaco energy. It is not removed in toto through the wound, so the amount of the size of the wound is as small as 2.2 to 2.8, and the nucleus is emulsified within the eye, and therefore this technique is called as phacoemulsification. Phaco standing for lens and emulsification standing for the emulsification of the nucleus. So this is an animation of how this technique is done. Basically, two side ports are made along with the main incision. the anterior capsule is opened in a circular fashion. The nucleus is freed from all the sides by a hydrodissection, that is dissection with a small amount of jet of fluid. And once the nucleus is freed, it can be easily rotated and cracked into multiple fragments. So once this nucleus was cracked into multiple fragments, it can be then emulsified. Each fragment or each pie of the nucleus is emulsified out and sucked out through the small incision through the phaco probe itself. Having done that, the remnants, the cortical remnants, are then aspirated out from different quadrants. This is a very delicate technique, because behind this is the posterior capsule, which is the thinnest membrane in the human body. And if there is a rupture in this membrane, there would be no support for placing the intraocular lens. After placing the lens, the wound is just hydrated. So it is sealed by just hydration, and no stitches are required, being such a small wound. So this is an actual phacoemulsification in progress. Like you can see, the nucleus is now being cracked into multiple pieces after being held with high vacuum. And once this cracking is done, you can see individual fragments which are brought out into the pupillary plane and then emulsified with the phaco energy. The phaco energy is in the form of a vibrating tip, which vibrates at about 40,000 times per second. And with the help of this vibration, which in the past was a longitudinal vibration and now is an elliptical vibration in the newer machines, here the cortical aspiration is being seen. That is, the peripheral fluffy material of the cortex is being aspirated out. This is done by a bimanual technique. So there is an aspiration which is occurring from the right quadrant, and the irrigation is occurring through the other quadrant. And once all the cortex is aspirated, the chamber is reformed with a jelly-like substance called as a viscoelastic. And then you can see the lens being, a foldable lens is being pushed into the eye through the same small incision. And this lens goes in the same capsular bag from which the nucleus was removed. So we are retaining the whole bag, not only the posterior capsule, but also a rim of the anterior capsule. And then the lens is dialed into the bag and placed in the same position where the natural crystalline lens of the body was. So what are the advantages of phacoemulsification? Like I said, the size of the incision is very small. The procedure time is hardly about 8 to 10 minutes, depending on the grade of the cataract. All these surgeries can be done under topical anesthesia. So there are no drops, there are no injections. It can be done only with the help of drops. There is no requirement of a post-op patching or shielding the eye. There are no stitches. So basically, this is a no injection, or rather it's called as a no prick, no stitch, and no patch technique. And obviously the rehabilitation is very fast, being a wound size of about 2.2 millimeters. The patient can literally resume back work within the next 2 days. So this is the beauty of this technique. So having seen the modification in the entire stages of cataract surgery, let us now come to see what has changed in the different types of IOLs, because IOL is an integral part of the cataract surgery. So like I said, initially we had an anterior chamber lens which was placed on top of the iris. And this had a disadvantage that being very close to the cornea, it could cause a damage to the corneal endothelium, especially in patients with a shallow chamber. And this caused something called as a pseudophakic bullous keratopathy, where there was an entire opacification of the cornea, often requiring a corneal transplant. So this lens didn't really stand the test of time. And then we have shifted to the posterior chamber IOLs. Initially, we had rigid IOLs. Rigid IOLs were made out of PMMA, that is polymethyl methacrylate. These lenses required a larger size of wound. The diameter of this lens was about 6.5 millimeters. So you required a wound size of at least 6.5 millimeters for this lens to be implanted. So with time, we had the foldable lenses, which could be either silicon lenses in the first generation, and then we shifted to acrylic. Again, the acrylic are of two types, the hydrophilic and the hydrophobic. The hydrophobic is the latest lens, and that is actually the lens which is on which all the newer lenses are on the platform on all the newer lenses are being made. Advantage of the foldable lens was that it went in through a very small wound size, and the smallest wound size, like I said, is a 2.2, but then we have certain lenses which are available for micro incision cataract surgery, which can even go through a 1.8 millimeter incision. Now, the IOLs again can be a monofocal IOL where the patient's distance vision gets corrected but requires glasses for near only. Then you had the bifocal IOLs, which corrects the distance and the near, but the intermediate range, the range in between, that is a range from about 40 to 60 millimeters, which is very important for today's working patients, that is patients who are working on a computer terminal, and in fact for everyone, because computers are an integral part of our lives. This distance, the intermediate distance, was very important. So after the bifocals came in, the multifocals, or rather what is called as a trifocal lens, which had all the ranges, the far, the intermediate, and the near. So these are the latest lenses which are being used, the trifocal lenses. We also have something called as an extended depth of focus lens, or the EDOF lens, where the disadvantages of the multifocal lens, basically, like I said, the multifocal lens, as can be seen in this picture, has got multiple rings around it. These rings are responsible to give rise to a lot of glare and halo and a sort of a night vision problem, which got sorted out with the EDOF lens, or the lens with the extended depth of focus, because this didn't have the same sort of rings which were there on the multifocal lens. So this is definitely an advancement over the older generation bifocal lenses. We also now have what is called as a toric IOL. A toric IOL is an IOL which has got a cylindrical number inbuilt in the lens. So for all patients who have got a high degree of corneal astigmatism preoperatively, who would later on require a cylindrical correction even for their distance number, that gets sorted out by that cylindrical number can be corrected by using a toric IOL. A toric IOL has got the cylindrical number along a particular axis. You can see these marks over here. These are the marks along which the cylindrical number is available, is present, and this has to be aligned in the axis where the maximum astigmatism occurs. It's a very exacting surgery. We also have now got blue light blocking IOLs, where not only the ultraviolet but the extreme ranges of blue lights are also blocked. Thus, these lenses help in preventing damage to the retina because of the blue light. So the incidence of macular degeneration goes down with these blue light blocking IOLs. The latest generation of IOLs are also available in the preloaded fashion, so that the lens doesn't have to be exposed to the OT atmosphere. They come preloaded and can be directly injected into the eye. Having said that, today we also have a entire new modality of treatment, which is called as a laser cataract surgery. So it is called as a femtosecond assisted laser cataract surgery, which is called as also called as FLACS. These are the various instruments, various generation of machines which are used in FLACS. So what is done in this is the initial opening of the anterior capsule is done with a laser. So this you can see is a manual forceps method of opening the anterior capsule, which is still done. It is not given up, but when we use a laser assisted cataract surgery, this can be done with the help of a laser. Advantage of this is this can be very well centered. The shape can be absolutely circular, which may not always be possible in a manual capsular rhexis. The size of the rhexis is again very, very accurate in case of FLACS as opposed to a manual cataract surgery. So the basic advantage is the repeatability and the precise anterior capsulotomy, which is possible with a FLACS surgery as opposed to the manual. Again, because the size of the rhexis is very accurate, we can have a perfect overlap of the IOL margin by the rhexis so that the lens is very well centered and remains centered. The second advantage of the flax is that it can be used for breaking the nucleus into multiple pieces. So the initial cracking which is done with the phacoemulsification can be avoided. The amount of energy used in phacoemulsification is less because the cracking is done with the help of the laser energy. So this is what it is done. So here, like I said, a phacoemulsification probe is being used to crack the nucleus. In flax, this is done with the laser energy. However, after having done these steps, the patient has to be taken back to the operating table under the microscope, and we have to use the phacoemulsification probe to remove each and every of these fragments which have been cracked with a laser energy. So the flax or the femtosecond assisted laser cataract surgery does not eliminate the step of phacoemulsification. It adds one more step. It makes life a little simpler for the phaco surgeon, but the phaco cannot be given up because we need to remove these fragments which are made into the eye. Again, the advantage is the amount of phaco energy used is much lesser, so the chances of macular edema, the chances of other complications due to the higher energy used within the eye is lesser. Femtosecond laser can also be used to make the corneal incisions, which otherwise are made with a manual with a keratome, which can be either a stainless steel keratome or a diamond keratome. We also have a newer technique of making the anterior capsular opening, which is not as expensive as the flax, which is called as a Zepto laser capsulotomy, where what is done is, sorry, I think one slide has gone. Where what is done is a special probe, which is called as a Zepto probe, is initially inserted into the eye through a small 2.2 millimeter incision. Once this is inserted within the eye, it is opened up. Now this has got a very specialized ring, which is used to deliver a small burst of an impulse to the anterior capsule after holding the anterior capsule with a vacuum. Having done that, it is called Zepto because the amount of energy is used is only for a zeptosecond, which is smaller than a femtosecond, and you can see a perfect capsulotomy occurring. Now here, the advantage of a Zepto capsulotomy is that the patient does not have to be shifted from one table to the other. The moment the Zepto capsulotomy is over, we can continue with the phacoemulsification. In addition to this, in cataract surgery today, we have different planning tools. Initially, all the lenses which were implanted inside the eye was a +20 diopter standard lens, and therefore there was a lot of variability. In spite of putting in the lens inside the eye, the post-operative refraction was quite unreliable. Today we started off initially with a manual keratometer, a contact ultrasound A-scan was done. This was the first generation. This was followed by a non-contact immersion ultrasound. But today we use a laser assisted device called as the IOL Master or the LensStar, which is used to calculate not only the curvature of the cornea, but also the axial length, the anterior chamber depth, the white to white, that means the corneal diameter. Everything is calculated by this device. And we have latest planning tools which are used like the topography, the aberrometry. And in today's times, since we plan each and every steps of our travel, we also have something called as an image guided cataract surgery, or the Varion, which we are using routinely in our clinic today. So what is done here is an initial image of the eye is captured in the sitting position. There is a planning station where the entire surgery can be planned. We can plan where the incision should be. We can plan where the which axis the toric lens can be put into. We can plan the size of the incision. All this is then transported on to the microscope, and you get an overlay while doing the surgery. So all our surgeries are done with the overlay. So here you can see the axis, exact axis along which the lens has to be implanted, that is shown through the microscope. So this has become an image guided cataract surgery, which is almost like a robotic surgery. Only thing is it requires a surgeon at the other end of the microscope. Phacoemulsification machines over a period of time have also undergone a sea change. What we use today is the most latest generation gold standard machine, that is Centurion phacoemulsification machine. So that was a small talk about it was very difficult to summarize the whole talk in a very short time, but because the amount of changes which have occurred over a period of time in cataract surgery are so much that I've tried to get this down into as few slides as possible. So I think we'll stop here for some time, take questions before we proceed to the next stage of the talk. So if there are any questions,
I think we will take questions right at the end.
you want me to finish off the second part of the talk also?
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Then I'll share my slides again. Okay, so now coming to the second half of my talk, that is the newer developments in refractive surgery. Basically, refractive surgery encompasses a wide range of different types of surgeries which are done in order to correct the refraction. So if a patient does not want to use an optical aid, that is glasses or contact lenses, one has to think of going in for a refractive surgery for correcting his refractive error. So it all started with the Russian ophthalmologist Fedorov, who started with the radial keratotomy, where basically radial cuts were made on the cornea. How this helped was, it helped to flatten the cornea. Because the cornea was flattened, it was used as a technique for treating myopia because the axial length was decreased. However, because it was done on the cornea, there was some amount of corneal healing which took place over a period of time, and the result was never static. There was constant changes in the refraction which is occurring. The results were very unreliable. There was no scientific method of calculating the amount of cuts required to correct X number of refractive error. So different surgeons had different nomograms. There was no standard nomogram used, and therefore over a period of time it was found that this surgery didn't have good results. There was a permanent weakening of the cornea because of these cuts. Sometimes the depth of the cuts varied from area to area, because of which very often you had a perforation of the cornea. So a lot of complications were seen in those early days. However, this was something which people were looking out for, because there was suddenly a spurt of patients who wanted to get rid of their number. And when RK came in, you saw a huge number of patients getting it done. There was a lot of people leaving the city of Bombay, going to places like Indore, Amritsar, and getting the surgery done, because those were the early centers where this surgery was started. So now in today's generation of refractive surgery, basically the refractive surgery could be divided into keratorefractive surgery and non-keratorefractive surgery. What it means is any surgery, any refractive surgery which is done on the cornea would be called as keratorefractive surgery, kerato standing for cornea. And anything which is being done not on the cornea is a non-keratorefractive surgery. So the keratorefractive surgeries are basically of three types: LASIK, PRK standing for photorefractive keratectomy, and SMILE. Again, the LASIK which we do can be either a bladed LASIK or a blade-free LASIK. The bladed LASIK can be with a linear or a pendular motor, which is called as a microkeratome. Non-keratorefractive surgery is either a phakic IOL or an ICL, where a lens, or rather a contact lens, is placed within the eye, or a technique called as a refractive lens exchange, where a clear lens from within the eye is removed and an artificial lens is placed in the place of the clear lens, just like what is done in the cataract surgery. Coming now to the first half, that is the keratorefractive surgery. So LASIK basically started with the microkeratome, where a motor was used, which could be either with a linear blade or an oscillating blade. This motor had a blade inside. So as the motor got activated, this blade was vibrating and it made a precise flap on the cornea. This flap could be made from 90 to 180 microns. And there were various microkeratomes which came in and which is still being used. However, the disadvantage of a microkeratome or a bladed LASIK is the non-repeatability or the non-standardization, because it all dependent upon the patient to patient. It dependent. It was a lot of dependence was occurring on the intraocular pressure of an individual patient or the corneal curvature of the individual patient, and therefore the flap thickness varied with the same blade, with the same motor, with the same ring from patient to patient. So this was a small video of how this technique was done. So here you can see the motor is first placed on the eye. The eye is then held with a vacuum so that the cornea is stabilized, and the corneal tissue came in through the ring, and this was then cut through this linear keratome. Having done that, the flap was lifted. So you can see now the flap is being lifted from on the cornea. So this was the entire technique. However, like I said, the flap thickness was not always standardized. Again, once this motor is activated, nothing can be controlled by the surgeon. So once the motor is activated, we have to wait for the motor to do its job. And only then one would know whether the flap which was made was a perfect flap or no. There were other complications like a buttonholing of the flap or an incomplete flap, or sometimes a flap without a hinge, which all were part and parcel of this technique called as the microkeratome technique. So today, this has evolved into a newer technique called as a femtosecond LASIK or a femto LASIK or a blade-free LASIK, basically because of the safety and the predictability. The complications of the flap-related complications are much lower, and this is a latest advancement which is available. Again, there is a further advancement in the femtosecond laser called as the Contura or the topo-guided LASIK. Basically, where what happens is, it is not only the number which is corrected, but individual irregularities or aberrations of the cornea are corrected. So this is a more personalized or a customized treatment, thus giving rise to not only correcting the refractive error, but also correcting the aberrations in the cornea and giving rise to a much better contrast than what the patient had even prior to the LASIK surgery. So this is how a femtosecond flap is created. The image of the cornea is first acquired from the topolyzer. That is a topography or the corneal curvature mapping. Having done that, a patient interface or a cone is now placed on the patient's eye. And through this, a vacuum is activated. The femtosecond laser gantry is then lowered into the cone. And now, like you can see here, once this suction is achieved, you can see here the suction being achieved. Here, this is the suction. It shows the suction is achieved. And having done this, the laser is activated. Once the laser is activated, the laser beams are used to dissect the flap without actually opening the flap. So the flap is dissected, the side cuts are made. And then the gantry and the patient interface is removed out from the eye. Having done that, the flap is opened like it was opened with in the microkeratome technique. And this is followed with the laser ablation. So the flap has been opened like you saw initially with the microkeratome. The opening of the flap with the femtosecond laser is also more or less similar. And now you can see the excimer laser, the blue dots which are firing on the cornea is the excimer laser which is being fired. The excimer laser machine decides the amount of laser required to correct a specific amount of refractive error. The pattern, if you're doing a Contura or a topo guided technique, The pattern of the ablation which has to occur to correct the corneal aberrations is also decided by the machine software. And then the laser is applied to the cornea. So the Contura Vision, like I said, gives you a much better vision. It is also gives rise to what is stated as a supernormal vision, or a vision which is better than normal. So very often you have these patients who have initially who are seeing 20/20 or 6/6, improving to a vision of say a 20/10 or a 6/4, and this is entirely possible because of the correction of the corneal aberration. We now come to the next technique which is used in the chelatorefractive surgery called as a PRK or photorefractive keratectomy. The difference between a PRK and the LASIK is that in PRK there is no flap made. In LASIK we started off by making a flap which is either by a microkeratome or by a femtosecond laser. In PRK what we do is the laser is applied to the corneal surface after removal of the epithelium. This is especially useful in patients with not a very high degree of myopia. Again, in patients in which LASIK is not possible because they have a thin cornea or a cornea which is slightly suspicious or a borderline cornea, we can do a PRK. Now, in this, like I said, initially the epithelium is removed, which can be either with an alcohol or it can be a transepithelial PRK where the excimer laser is used to do both the steps, to remove the epithelium as well as to correct the refractive error, which is also therefore becomes a no-touch technique. We just explain this with the help of a small clip. So this is a PRK where an alcohol is being used to remove the epithelium. So there is a small ring which is initially placed on the cornea. This ring is filled with 20% alcohol. So having placed alcohol inside this ring, the epithelium gets exposed to the alcohol for 20 seconds. This helps in loosening the epithelium in that particular area, not over the entire corneal surface, but in that area where the alcohol is applied, the epithelium is loosened. The alcohol is then washed off. Just speed in this. So it's washed off. The alcohol is removed out with a Merocell sponge, is used to absorb the alcohol so that it doesn't spread on the remaining part of the cornea. The entire eye is then washed off to remove any traces of alcohol on the cornea. And then the epithelium can be easily scraped out with the help of a spatula. You can see there the epithelium is gently being removed with the help of a forceps and a spatula. We now are using a different technique of epithelial removal, though the alcohol technique is not given up, called as a transepithelial PRK, where a laser energy is used to do both the steps, that is to removal of the epithelium as well as the correction of the refractive error is both done with the excimer laser energy. So like you can see here, the first step here is centering the eye, and the laser energy is being now firing on the cornea where it is being used to remove the epithelium. So this takes about 30 seconds. This takes much longer than the actual removal of the corneal stroma or the resculpting of the corneal stroma for the number correction. The epithelial removal is a slightly longer technique, taking anything between 20 to 30 seconds depending on the epithelial thickness. Again, we had to initially calculate the epithelial thickness and then feed that into the machine so that the amount of epithelium is then removed, and then this is followed with the excimer laser firing to correct the refractive error. The third technique in the chelatorefractive surgery is something called a SMILE, which is a small lenticule removal. So again, what happens is a very small incision is made through which a lenticule of the cornea is removed. It is not an ablation of the corneal stroma, but a well-planned lenticule is made and dissected out through that small incision. As this can be shown with a small clip over here. So like this is done entirely with a femtosecond laser. There is no excimer laser used in this particular technique. Like I had shown the initial film of the femtosecond being used to make a flap. Here the femtosecond laser is used to dissect the lenticule within the corneal stroma. The anterior corneal flap doesn't have to be opened up. So here you see an anterior plane is dissected, followed by a dissection of the posterior plane. This is being done by the laser. Having done that, there's a very small side cut made through which a spatula is passed initially into the anterior plane. So now you can see that below the flap, which is not opened, it's a closed flap. Below the anterior stromal flap, the anterior and the posterior planes are being dissected out. The size of this lenticule, the thickness of the lenticule is software decided depending on the refractive error. And then a forceps is used to just pull out this lenticule. There you saw this lenticule coming out of the eye, and that is the end of the technique. The advantage is it is not an open flap. The amount of incision is a very small incision, and therefore it is called as a SMILE. That is a small incision lenticule extraction. So basically it's a 2 millimeter incision. It's minimally invasive. It's a flap-free technique. It does not induce any extraspherical aberrations. The chances of long-term dryness are lesser. However, the Contura LASIK, which is today being done, has got many more advantages over a normal conventional LASIK and SMILE, is that it can, the wow effect or the taking the patient beyond 6x6 is definitely possible with a Contura, which is not possible with a SMILE. Again, the cost factor is much more in the SMILE technique as compared to normal conventional LASIK or the Contura LASIK. Now, what happens if a patient wants to get a LASIK done, but he is not a candidate for a LASIK, either because he's got a thin cornea or he's got an abnormality in the corneal topography, like a keratoconus or a borderline keratoconus. So there are alternatives to LASIK, and these are basically classified in the non-keratorefractive technique. So we have the phakic IOL and we have the refractive lens exchange. So what is done in phakic IOLs basically is that a small incision is made and a contact lens is implanted within the eye, which is placed in front of the normal crystalline lens behind the pupil. So even with corneas thinner than 480 microns, even in patients with keratoconus, with high astigmatism, this can be done. So a small clip here where an initial incision is made, and there you see a phakic IOL or an ICL inserted. It goes behind the iris in front of the crystalline lens, and it is placed inside the eye, just in front of the crystalline lens, and the feet of this lens rest at the periphery. So there is no contact. There's a vault which occurs between this lens and the crystalline lens. So there's no contact of this lens to the crystalline lens. Refractive lens exchange, on the other hand, involves a non-laser procedure where what is done is the clear lens inside the eye is removed out, and this is replaced with a artificial lens, which is nothing but an intraocular lens, which can either be a monofocal or a multifocal lens, depending upon what the patient wants, whether he wants a freedom from glasses for the distance or he wants a freedom from the glasses for both distance and near. It's very, very effective in the presbyopic age group. In fact, it is the best technique available today for treatment of presbyopia. But it is also done in younger patients in whom LASIK is not possible, or even ICL or that implantable contact lens is not possible because of a thinner, because of a shallower anterior chamber or other complications in the cornea which are pre-existing. So that is, this is our team of our cataract and refractive surgeons, and we've been into all these techniques of refractive surgery for the past 25 years today, right from the first era of the excimer laser to the latest techniques where we do the Contura LASIK as well as the femtosecond guided LASIK surgery. Thank you for your kind attention, and now I can take in any questions which the audience has.
Okay, Nitin, I will start the questions.
I'll just stop sharing the screen
Yeah.
first.
Some may be basic, some may be repetitive.
Sure.
How to choose IOL for the patient?
Well,
So if the patient asks us, what are the factors on which the selection of IOL depends?
okay, so basically, the basic factor is whether the patient wants to get rid of his distance number only, or he wants to get rid of both his distance as well as reading numbers. So the first question which the patient needs to be asked is, are you okay with wearing glasses for reading after cataract surgery? Many of the patients will say yes, because they have always been using reading glasses. So for these patients, one doesn't need to consider a multifocal or a bifocal lens. One can consider a monofocal lens. Then the remaining part of which monofocal lens again depends upon whether the patient has a pre-existing astigmatism or a pre-existing cylinder. If he has a pre-existing cylinder and if he wants to get rid of his distance glasses totally, he needs to go in for a toric lens. If he does not have a pre-existing cylinder, he can go in for any of the normal monofocal lens. So this is a broad method of a very brief method by which we can guide the patient of what lens to go in for. There are individual things like depending on the asphericity of the cornea, whether the patient needs to go in for a aspheric lens or a lens with a spherical aberration. But those are all possible only after doing the aberrometry of the patient and doing the topography of the patient. But in general, if the patient is willing to wear glasses for reading, he does not need a bifocal or a multifocal lens. If he wants to get rid of his entire refractive correction, distance and near, he needs to go in for a multifocal or a bifocal lens. Again, what is important here is to understand is when we are going in for a multifocal or a bifocal lens, it is not an elimination of the glasses, but less dependence on glasses, because there could be times, even with a multifocal lens, that for seeing very fine print or for seeing very small things like the expiry date on drugs, the patient may have to use small amount of refractive error, but that's a very small amount of refractive error and for a very brief period of time, depending on when the patient wants to do those fine work. But the dependence on the glasses is much lesser in these cases. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Very good answer. Which is the best bifocal IOL?
Again, like I said, that is patient dependent, but brand names, there are many brands. There are lenses which are made either by Alcon or by AMO, which is now J&J, or by Zeiss. These are the three standard companies which are manufacturing into the manufacture of bifocal as well as trifocal lenses. Each has its advantages and disadvantages. Again, that depends upon a patient factor. So it's not like saying that because you're paying X amount, this is the best. It is what is best for the patient. It is horses for the courses. It depends upon the individual. We have to match the lens to the patient's eye. So in case the patient has got a high asphericity, we need to give him a lens with a high positive asphericity. We have to give him a lens with a negative asphericity. So again, one can't say that this particular lens is the best one. But yes, today the trifocal lenses are probably the best lenses available in the market. Brand and the type of the lens is patient specific.
So what is the range of refractory error that can be corrected surgically, lowest and highest?
Are we talking about refractive error as a refractive procedure or in a cataract procedure?
No, refractive procedure.
Okay, so refractive procedures normally, see, there is a standard deviation which is there of or a predictability range for any refractive surgery. The predictability range in today's modern machines is plus or minus 0.5. That means even after doing a perfect refractive surgery, you could have a standard deviation of plus or minus 0.5, which does not make the patient need to wear glasses. So obviously, if a refractive error is less than 0.5, one wouldn't want to go in for a refractive procedure unless this patient needs to get it done from a employment point of view. That means if a patient wants to go in for a specific line where no glasses or no refractive error is an important thing, one could try treating a refractive error as small as even a 0.5. But for all practical purposes, we don't take in patients for a refractive error of less than 0.75 or 1 diopter. The upper limit of the refractive surgery depends upon various factors like the corneal thickness, the corneal curvature. So it depends upon what are we treating. When we are treating with a LASIK, normally we don't treat beyond 12 diopters of myopia and beyond 6 or 7 diopters of hyperopia. Whereas if the patient has more than 12 diopters of myopia, we can still do an implantable contact lens. So again, it depends upon what is the refractive procedure. Numbers even as high as 25 to 27 can be treated with a refractive surgery, but not with a LASIK. That has to be done with a non-keratorefractive surgery like an ICL or a refractive lens exchange.
Absolute contraindication for refractive correction surgery.
Very thin cornea, pre-existing keratoconus, these are absolute contraindications. We definitely not touch a patient with a cornea which is very thin, because what we are doing with the keratorefractive surgery is we are thinning the cornea more by sculpting it to correct the refractive error. So a very thin cornea would definitely not be a case where we can risk doing a keratorefractive surgery. Having said that, we can still do a refractive procedure on these patients with keratoconus as well as with thin corneas by doing a non-keratorefractive surgery like an ICL.
Okay. Which cataract or IOLs generally require a YAG laser cleaning later on?
So one needs to understand that when we are doing the modern techniques of cataract surgery, what we are doing is we are opening the anterior capsule like I had shown, called as the capsular rhexis. We are removing the nucleus from within the eye. We are cleaning the cortex. What happens now is we are leaving an entire bag of the capsule within the eye, and inside this bag we are implanting the artificial lens. This bag consists of the posterior capsule, it consists of the zonules and a rim of the anterior capsule. There are epithelial cells which are there below the anterior capsule, which are normal epithelial cells. With time, these epithelial cells grow, they tend to migrate behind, and as they migrate behind, they tend to thicken or they tend to form a layer on the posterior capsule, which is called as an after cataract or a capsular thickening. When this reaches the center of the visual axis, it causes a visual distortion. And once it causes a visual distortion, one has to treat it. In the past, it used to be manually by opening the posterior capsule. Today, it is done with a YAG laser, which is an OPD technique. Now, it is not that a particular lens will give rise to a increased rate of posterior capsular opacification. Yes, there were old lenses, the hydrophilic lenses had a higher rate of capsular opacification as compared to today's hydrophobic lenses. Again, the modern day lenses are made with a square edge. Because of the square edge, the migration of these cells is decreased. So one can't say that a particular lens is responsible for giving rise to a YAG laser, capsular thickening needing a YAG laser, but the newer lenses are well made in such a way that the chances of posterior capsular opacification are lesser with the newer lenses, which are square edge lenses and which are made out of the hydrophobic acrylic material.
Okay, there is a question. 70-year-old male having myopia plus presbyopia wants to get rid of both spectacles. So first question was that whether we can do refractive surgery. Then the same patient has cataract. What should be the right answer?
At the age of 70, there is absolutely no need of doing a keratorefractive surgery, because even if he doesn't have a cataract today, he is going to develop a cataract within the next few years. and he would definitely require a cataract surgery. So the best thing to do at that particular age would be to straight away go in for, even if he doesn't have a cataract, do a clear lens extraction and implant a multifocal lens inside the eye to get rid of both his distance and reading refractive errors.
What is the surgery advised for cataract 70 plus age and approximate cost?
All the surgeries today would be by a phacoemulsification technique. There is the older techniques of extracapsular and intracapsular are given up. So all surgeries involve phacoemulsification. Cost of phacoemulsification varies from center to center, also depends upon the type of the lens used. It also depends upon the modalities used. For example, if you're using a Zepto laser to do a capsular excess, if you're using flax, the rates go up. But as a ballpark figure, today a phacoemulsification would vary on the depending on the lens and on the procedures used, right from something as low as 15,000 to maybe as high as 1,25,000.
In some patients, we see that the refractory error keeps increasing. Like 26-year-old starts with 0.5 and in 10 years it becomes 6. So what is the cause and what can be done? Should they go in for LASIK or refractive surgery?
The first thing which we do whenever any patient approaches us for a refractive surgery is see the stability of his refraction. Normally, refraction in an average Indian population should be stable anytime between 18 to 20. Beyond that, if there are changes which are occurring, we still have to wait until the refraction is stabilized. We can't do a keratorefractive or any sort of refractive surgery unless the refraction is stabilized. There are cases of pathological myopia where the refraction keeps changing even later beyond 20, and definitely we would not do a refractive surgery for these patients. The gold rule is if the refraction has not changed for the past 6 months to 1 year, the chances of his refraction changing after that is very minuscule, and the patient can be taken up for refractive surgery.
What is the life of an intraocular lens?
Well, it's a lifelong thing. There are hardly any cases where we need to change the lens, especially with today's modern day lenses. We had a very, very short period of time where the soft lenses were introduced, called as the hydrophilic soft lenses of a particular material was initially introduced, which led to opacification of those lenses. And those were the only times when those lenses had to be exchanged with the new lens. The other lenses, anterior chamber lenses, which were used in the past, had to be exchanged out because they were causing corneal decompensation. But with the sort of lenses which are used today, the modern day hydrophilic as well as the hydrophobic acrylic, these lenses have, there's no upper limit on the life of the lens. It can live along with the patient. In fact, the same lenses are being used in neonates as well as in pediatric age group when we do a pediatric cataract. Considering that this child has got an average lifespan of a minimum 60-year lifespan, so we can definitely be sure that these lenses will will see the test of time.
Post-procedure care for refractive surgery?
Well, the most important care for refractive surgery is the patient is not allowed to rub his eye, because we're talking about the LASIK surgery, because we have a flap. This flap takes at least 2 to 3 weeks to adhere well to the stromal bed, and any rubbing of the eye can cause flap folds or flap striae, which can be treated, but we don't want to take the patient up for a second procedure. All the other precautions are the same, like in any other surgeries of the eyes. That means taking care of good asepsis, so no water going into the eye for the first week, basically because we don't know the sterility of the water. The general hygiene, which is important, no rubbing the eye, no eye makeup. The general care and the care of the eye, which would occur after any other surgery. No specific, and all this is short term. It's all for a week or so. No rubbing would be for about 2 to 3 weeks, but all the other things are for a week or so.
There are a lot of questions of cost, but I think cost something which you cannot generalize.
No, and it depends upon the procedure. So since it depends upon the
So
procedure, one
let's
it's
say
very
what the cost
difficult.
of toric lens.
Well, on average cost of toric, depending on whether they are a lens which is manufactured in India or the lens which we use from one of the multinational firms, would be anything between, say, with the surgical package, would be anything between 40,000 to maybe 70,000. Again, without using any of the latest modalities of cataract surgery like the Zepto or the Femto. Again, if a Zepto or a Femto is used, those are add-on charges. When I'm saying this, I'm saying this is the cost of the package for surgery. The cost of a toric lens per se would depend upon the company from which we are procuring the lens.
Now, this is a question I'm not very clear what the doctor says. If a person of 77 today who had undergone cataract surgery in 1980, can he use LASIK treatment now? Why should it be required actually?
Okay, I think there is a small this thing. I'll try to explain the question first. I think what our esteemed colleague is asking is that if he has got a residual refraction following cataract surgery, which was very common in the past, because like I said, when we started off doing cataract surgery with lens implants, we didn't have exacting methods of calculating the lens power. So initially, like I said, all lenses we used to use standard 20 diopter lenses, or we used to use the ultrasound method for detecting the lens power. So we had a lot of variation in the lot of non-predictability of the lens power, and the patient had a residual refraction. Yes, if the patient has got a residual refraction due to cataract surgery, due to maybe a non-properly decided lens power implanted inside the eye, we can definitely do a keratorefractive surgery to correct his refractive error, which is the post-operative refractive error, which can be either a LASIK or a PRK, and that can take care of the entire refraction, and the patient can be made emmetropic.
Okay, then are getting dark shadows in front of eye and watery eye post cataract surgery is a common complaint?
Watering from the eyes can very often occur due to a tear film or a ocular surface disorder. Now, any ocular surface disorder is quite common in patients above 40 years of age, and this can be further worsened by any procedure on the eye, especially when we are doing a cataract surgery or a refractive surgery where there is some amount of severance of the nerves, of the corneal nerves. This can give rise to a further exacerbation of ocular surface disorder, and therefore you can have this sort of watering, which is usually short-lived, but in certain times where the pre-existing ocular surface disorder is very severe, and if it was not picked up prior to the cataract or refractive surgery, then this can require additional procedures later on to treat the ocular surface disorder. Dark shadows are not a common side effect of any cataract or any surgery of the eye. This is basically age related. Very often the patient, this could be in the form of a floater where there is a vitreous degeneration, again totally unrelated to cataract surgery. But very often what happens is, even if these floaters were existing prior to the cataract surgery, the patient has not noticed it because he had a cataract. Because he had a cataract, his vision was subnormal and he was not able to appreciate these floaters. Moment the cataract is removed, when his vision improves, he is able to appreciate the floaters from within the eye, and therefore we feel that it is due to the cataract surgery. It is not due to the cataract surgery, but it is the patient is appreciating something which is already there, and this is basically an age-related degeneration, which the patient has to ignore as long as the retina is normal.
Approximate cost of laser surgery?
Can be as low as 17,000, 15 to 17,000, and can be as high as about 60 to 70,000 per eye.
Will anyone require a repeat refractive correction surgery?
Yes, like I said, there is a standard deviation plus or minus 0.5 is the normal predictability range, but sometimes you could be beyond the standard deviation also. There could be chances where there could be a higher amount of refractive error which is left behind, but that can easily be enhanced. We don't need to make the flap again. The flap is already there. We just have to reopen the flap and just polish off the remaining refractive error with a small amount of excimer laser, and that corrects the residual refractive error.
What does the developmental cataract in a child mean? What is the prognosis?
Well, it depends upon the cause of the developmental cataract, and as long as it is involving the visual axis, one has to go in for surgery. And the prognosis with the current day techniques and with the intraocular lens is very good, as long as the other pre-existing conditions of the eye are also taken care of. For example, very often a patient with a developmental cataract may have an element of amblyopia, that means a lazy eye, so that also has to be managed following the cataract surgery. Once all that is taken care of, the prognosis is excellent.
What are the dangers of high myopia above 10?
Usually these patients have a lot of retinal complications. You could have pre-existing retinal tears, retinal degeneration. Chances of retinal detachments are very high. So basically, these patients are prone to a lot of retinal conditions, and therefore these patients definitely need a thorough retinal examination at least once a year if everything is normal. But if there are pre-existing retinal degenerations, the frequency of these retinal examinations could be much shorter. One would need to get it done once in 6 months also. At the same time, these patients are also prone to other conditions of the eye, like they're prone to glaucoma. So one needs a constant follow-up of these patients at a shorter interval as compared to the normal population.
A very wishful question. Any prevention for avoiding forming cataract or delaying it?
Well, there are various things which are implicated in the cataract formation. Now, one of the most common things which are implicated is ultraviolet light. So, if you could try and prevent exposure of your eye to ultraviolet light right from a young age, you can't decide at the age of 45, 50 that I want to now prevent my cataract by using an ultraviolet blocking glasses. This needs to be done right from the beginning. So if from a young age you're in the habit of using a good quality UV blocking light, that doesn't mean just ordinary sunglasses. Ordinary sunglasses may not have a UV blocker. So a good quality UV blocking light which blocks both UVA and UVB. If this is used over a period of time, yeah, the chances of developing a cataract which is due to the UV is decreased. But there are other reasons of a cataract developing, just a senile cataract. So that cannot be blocked unless we find a method of decreasing senility. So, like I said, other things which are implicated in formation of early cataracts is diabetes. So see to it that your diabetes is well controlled. The second thing is smoking. So avoid smoking, not after you reach the age of 45 or 50, but right from the beginning, if you could be off smoking. So all these things which are implicated in cataract formation, if those factors can be controlled right from a young age, yes, the chances of delaying the cataracts are much higher as compared to the other population.
Is phacoemulsification same for brown cataracts?
Well, the procedure is the same. Brown cataracts are more of a challenge for the surgeon because they are hard cataracts, and obviously in these cases when we use a laser-assisted cataract surgery to soften the nucleus or to fragment the nucleus, we are using less phaco power. But in cases where we don't even use phacoemulsification, can be done, but it's a more complicated technique. The margin of safety for the phacoemulsification becomes lesser because you're using higher energy. Again, when there's a brown cataract, the chances of having other complications while doing phacoemulsification are much higher as compared to a softer cataract.
Very specific question. I think this is from overseas. A patient with myopia 14, spherical plus cylinder, with glaucoma, intraocular pressure 20 to 30. Could this patient be put under for refractive correction surgery?
What
And if yes,
what
if
is the
yes,
age of the patient?
Dr. Ashok Madan, what is the age of the patient? Okay. Till he answers, does
Yeah.
a LASIK done in younger age come in the way of phaco done in later line?
Definitely no. The only thing which comes, which is a challenge for the phaco surgeon is calculating the lens power, because having changed the corneal curvature for doing a LASIK and to correct the refractive error, uh, it's very important that a proper calculation is done for calculating the lens power when the phacoemulsification has to be done. So it's very important that the patient retains his records of his refractive surgery, so that the initial corneal curvature which was there before the LASIK which was done is available to the surgeon calculating the IOL power. However, even if that is not available, with the modern day techniques which we use to calculate the IOL power, we can be more or less sure of getting the right power. But the only difference is, the only challenge lies in calculating the lens power and planning the surgery.
Okay. Cost of preloaded lens.
Again, that would depend upon the company from which we are procuring the lens. But as a procedure, it would vary between 40 to 70,000 as a package, from depending on the center where it is done.
Can floaters be corrected?
There is no, theoretically, yes, you can correct floaters. The floaters are there in the jelly of the in the vitreous jelly. If they are causing a visual disturbance, if they are causing blockage of the light going in, there are techniques by which this can be treated. A YAG laser can be done to cause break these floaters into smaller particles called vitreolysis. If that doesn't help, a vitrectomy can be done to remove the entire jelly of the eye if required. But these are extreme cases. Normal floaters do not require any treatment as long as it is not accompanied by flashes and as long as it is not causing a traction on the retina.
Teenager of 15 with hyperopia of -5, should we do refractive surgery now or wait for some time till it becomes constant?
First and the foremost thing, hyperopia would be +5. Second is, age 15 is definitely a contraindication for any refractive procedure, because the eye is still growing. We wouldn't consider any patient for a refractive procedure before the age of 18, and after ensuring that the refraction is stable for the last 6 to 9 months after the age of 18.
Can exposure to chemotherapy drugs in healthcare professionals lead to cataract? Like doctors or nurses in the chemotherapy departments?
In the chemotherapy department, no.
No.
In the radiotherapy department, yes.
Yes. Which drugs increase intraocular pressure?
Well, there are a whole list of drugs increasing intraocular pressure. The most common are the steroids. So steroids could be either systemic steroids, it could be topical steroids in the form of eye drops. Also, which is not known, which is not usually paid in attention to, is the topical steroids in the form of steroidal ointments used for various skin conditions, or even inhaled steroids in the form of inhalers over a long period of time. So chronic use of steroids definitely would raise their intraocular pressure. The other list is a very long list, and I think that we should cover up if we're doing an entire series on glaucoma.
Okay. So maybe in some time we'll call you. Does longer screen time damage eye?
It causes an eye strain.
Damage eye.
No, it doesn't damage the eye. It can cause an eye strain. It can cause ocular surface disorders like dry eyes.
Can you perform refractive error surgery after age of 50, or should you perform?
Again, after the age of 50, it depends upon what the patient's refractive error is, whether the patient has even a trace of a cataract or no, and what does the patient expect after the age of 50 by a refractive surgery. See, after the age of 50, he is definitely presbyopic along with his myopia or hyperopia. Now, if he wants correction from his myopia and hyperopia and doesn't mind wearing glasses for his presbyopia, and he doesn't have even a trace of a cataract, then he can definitely go in for a corneal refractive surgery or a LASIK. But if he has a cataract, I would still advise him to go in for a refractive lens exchange, because we don't need to do two surgeries then. We are taking care of, we're killing two birds with the same stone. We're taking care of his cataract also, which he'll not develop if you go in for a refractive lens exchange. Again, if this patient, even if he doesn't have a cataract, but wants freedom from both distance and near glasses, we can't give that to him with the LASIK surgery. LASIK surgery can either correct the distance number or can correct the near number. It can't correct both. So therefore, this patient would be better off if he wants to go in for a refractive lens exchange and a multifocal IOL to get rid of both the refractive errors.
This is, I'm sorry to trouble you for this. There is a request to repeat about what you spoke on floaters. They found it very interesting, but thoda clarity nahi hai.
Yeah, so floaters, like I said, are because of the degeneration in the vitreous jelly. Because of the degeneration of the vitreous jelly, these are the normal floaters which occur. Other causes of floaters could be a bleeding into the vitreous, which is could be due to some sort of a metabolic disorder like diabetes or hypercholesterolemia, where you have a branched retinal vein occlusion, where a retinal hemorrhage can break through and give rise to a bleeding into the vitreous. That can also manifest as vitreous floaters. But the common vitreous floaters, which people above the age of 45 see, are something which can be ignored as long as there is no concurrent retinal abnormality. So one needs to first do a thorough retinal examination, see that the retina is normal. If the retina is normal, if the vitreous jelly is not pulling upon the retina, then these vitreous floaters can be ignored, and the patient has to be encouraged to ignore this. However, if the vitreous floaters are to such an extent that they are clouding the whole vitreous and causing a fall in the vision of the patient, then these vitreous floaters may have to be treated. Treatment of this would depend upon the amount of floaters. If there's one large floater which is blocking his vision, one can do a YAG laser vitreolysis, which is a modern day technique of breaking that large floater into multiple small floaters and waiting for them to get absorbed. But if there are plenty of small vitreous floaters which are clouding the whole vitreous, causing a fall in the vision, one can think of going in for a vitrectomy. That means removal of the vitreous jelly, and then that is replaced with a fluid gas exchange.
Nowadays, we see a lot of children with high myopia. Any reason you can explain, or anything that we as family physicians should advise, other than not on video games?
Well, yeah, that is, it's not only video games. How video games affect is increased dependence on the near vision, and that is something which has to be avoided in the form of decreasing the convergence of the patient. Because convergence, excessive convergence, where the two eyes converge together, is known to implicate in the increased likelihood of myopia. Now, this can be avoided by trying to avoid things at a closer distance. So what we learned as children, where our parents used to just say that hold your books far. At that time, there was no reasoning to it. So the reasoning is very clear that once you hold it far, your convergence decreases. So try to hold your things at your arm's length. Decrease the usage of all handheld devices. More than video games, in today's online education era, you can't say that don't use the screen, but try to do everything on a laptop or a desktop instead of an iPhone, or instead of a phone or a tab, where you're holding it at the arm's length. So where you're holding it close to the eye. So all handheld devices should be avoided. The other thing is a good exposure to normal daylight, which does not mean just traveling to school and coming back, but like in our childhood, we used to expose our eye to the normal daylight by getting out of the house to play. That is something which has been found in the current day studies is very important to prevent progression of myopia. So a good exposure to normal daylight, and again the dietary factors, a good intake of vitamin A. These are all the factors which are implicated in trying to prevent rapid increase in myopia.
Nitin, there are no words to thank you. You have been excellent, and your willingness to answer even questions which were not pertaining to topic has been appreciated by most of the participants. Very,
Thank
very,
you.
very valuable talk, and we will definitely trouble you once again because glaucoma is on my mind. If the family doctor keeps telling patient, koi baat nahi, they may lose the eye. So maybe in about 2 months' time, we'll call you, and this time we'll call you on the second half so that you don't miss your practice.
No issue at all. It's been a pleasure.
You have been very, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a ton.
I
Thanks
will
for your
share
kind
the thanking coming to you, compliments I will share with you on the WhatsApp thing.
Thank you. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, one last question of mine. Now, I have, as you know, my astigmatism keeps increasing or changing. Suppose suppose whenever I undergo a cataract, I take a toric lens. Will that astigmatism stabilize or it will continue to get altered?
No, it'll for all practical purposes, it will stabilize because your astigmatism is a corneal astigmatism. So the corneal astigmatism would change to a very small extent over a period of time, but more or less you would not be dependent on glasses having gone in for a toric intraocular lens.
Okay. Thank you very much. And once again, you were excellent.
Thank you, Dr. Asrani. Thank you everyone for your kind attention.
Bye team. See you next week then.